Strike me down, then. Be the monster they all say you are. The words ripped from Clarissa Kingswell's throat, echoing against the obsidian pillars of the grand throne room. The sound of her palm striking the Alpha King's jaw rang out like a gunshot. The entire court gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the very oxygen from the room. 100 courtiers froze, waiting for the cobblestones to run red with her blood. King Silas Norwood's eyes, a terrifying luminescent silver, locked onto hers. He wiped a drop of blood from his lip. The shadows in the room seemed to writhe, rising to his command, but Silas did not raise his hand. He did not draw his blade. Slowly, deliberately, the most feared man in the realm lowered himself to the marble floor, bowing his dark head, and knelt before her. The obsidian keep was not a place of light. It was a monument to raw, unbridled power, built into the jagged cliffs of the Blackwood Mountains. The castle belonged to King Silas Norwood, the alpha of all alphas, a man whose reputation was painted in the blood of his enemies and the tears of his conquered subjects. For decades, the lesser pacts in human territories had paid the tithe a grueling tax of silver, grain, and occasionally, blood. Clarissa Kingswell was never meant to be in the throne room. She was merely a daughter of an impoverished human lord from the borderlands, a girl whose hands were calloused from tending her family's dying crops, rather than softening in silk gloves. But when her frail, younger sister was selected as part of the human tribute, a cruel custom to supply the castle with servants who rarely returned, Clarissa had taken her place. She stood in the center of the vast, cavernous hall, surrounded by towering columns of polished black stone that reflected the flickering light of braziers. The air was thick with the scent of pine, ozone, and the overwhelming, suffocating pheromones of the lichen nobility. They stood in clusters, draped in velvet and jewels, their eyes glowing with predatory amusement as the human tributes were lined up before the dais. At the top of the steps sat Silas. He was a terrifying vision of masculine perfection. Broad-shouldered and lethal, he wore a tunic of midnight blue spun with threads of silver, though it did little to hide the powerful corded muscles beneath. His face was carved from granite, all sharp angles and cruel, beautiful lines. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in Clarissa's veins. Liquid mercury, cold and ancient, assessing the room with a terrifying indifference. Beside him stood his highest advisor, Soren Davenport. Soren was a striking contrast to the king. He possessed a lithe elegance, his golden hair catching the firelight, his smile seemingly gentle but his eyes betraying a sharp, calculating intellect. To the left stood General Corbin Blackstone, a towering mountain of a man covered in battle scars, radiating an aura of absolute, uncompromising violence. "The tributes from the southern reaches, Your Majesty," Soren announced, his voice smooth as glass. Silas barely moved. "They look weak. Send them to the lower kitchens. If they cannot work, feed them to the hounds." A collective whimper rose from the line of tributes. The casual cruelty of the decree snapped something deep inside Clarissa. Years of starvation, of watching her people suffer while these wolves draped themselves in finery, boiled over into a blinding, searing rage. Before she could think, before the primal instinct of self-preservation could stop her, Clarissa broke the line. "You arrogant, soulless tyrant," she spat, her voice slicing through the heavy silence of the hall. The court froze. Even Corbin Blackstone's hand halted halfway to his sword hilt. Soren raised a golden brow, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his features. Silas slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What did you say, little human?" His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Clarissa's chest, a sound that promised a violent, agonizing death. "I said, you are a tyrant." Clarissa marched forward, her modest woolen dress swishing around her ankles. The guards moved to intercept her, but Silas raised a single commanding finger. They halted instantly. "We starve to fill your coffers. We bleed to entertain your court. You are not a king. You are a parasite." Lady Lorelei Brighton, a stunning lichen noblewoman with crimson lips and a predatory sneer, stepped forward from the crowd. "Tear out her tongue, Your Majesty. Such insolence from a mud-blooded peasant cannot stand." Silas ignored Lorelei. He stood, his massive frame unfolding from the throne. He descended the stairs, each step deliberate, predatory. He stopped mere inches from Clarissa. Up close, the sheer size of him was overwhelming. He smelled of a coming storm and dark earth. "You do not fear death?" he whispered, his silver eyes flashing. "I fear a life lived on my knees before a monster," Clarissa screamed. And then she slapped him. The sound was explosive. It was the crack of a whip in a silent tomb. Clarissa's hand stung, her palm burning from the impact against his granite-hard jaw. She waited for the claws. She closed her eyes, waiting for Corbin's sword to sever her head. Instead, she heard the rustle of heavy fabric. A collective, horrified gasp echoed through the court. Clarissa opened her eyes. King Silas Norwood, the Ruthless Alpha, had dropped to his right knee. He bowed his head, his dark hair falling over his forehead, exposing the vulnerable nape of his neck to her. "Command me," he murmured, his voice thick, entirely devoid of malice, carrying a reverence that shook the very foundations of the keep. "My queen." Clarissa did not end up in the dungeons. Instead, she found herself trapped in a prison of unimaginable luxury. The chambers she was escorted to were located in the highest tower of the East Wing, a place rumored to be reserved for the king's closest confidants. The room was expansive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Blackwoods. A massive four-poster bed draped in crimson silk dominated the center, and a fire crackled cheerfully in a hearth carved from white marble. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning in terrified, confused circles. He knelt. The Alpha King knelt, the memory of his mercury eyes, wide with a sudden, devastating vulnerability, played on an endless loop. What sick game was this? Lycans did not kneel to humans. They certainly did not call them queen. The heavy oak door swung open, and a young woman bustled in, carrying a tray of steaming food. She had bright copper hair and a dusting of freckles across her nose. "Good evening, my lady," the girl said, curtsying low. "I am Elodie Ridgway. I have been assigned as your personal handmaiden. I am not a lady," Clarissa stammered, eyeing the roasted pheasant and honeyed root vegetables on the tray. Her stomach growled violently, betraying her, and I don't understand what is happening. "Am I a prisoner?" Elodie set the tray down on a gilded table. "You are not a prisoner, my lady. The doors are unlocked, though," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I wouldn't advise wandering the halls. The court is unsettled by what transpired today." "Unsettled?" "I imagine they want to burn me at the stake," Clarissa said bitterly. Before Elodie could reply, the door opened again. This time it was Soren Davenport. The king's advisor stepped into the room with the quiet grace of a hunting cat. Elodie immediately stiffened, curtsying deeply before fleeing the room without another word. Soren smiled, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Lady Clarissa, what a remarkable display you put on today. You have thrown the Obsidian Court into absolute chaos." "I didn't mean to," Clarissa lied, lifting her chin. "I spoke the truth." Soren stepped closer, inspecting her as one might inspect a fascinating, dangerous insect. "Truth is a rare commodity in this castle. But tell me, do you know why Silas knelt to you? To mock me before he tortures me?" "Hardly," Soren chuckled, a dry, papery sound. "You, Clarissa Kingswell, are his fated mate." Clarissa's breath hitched. "That's impossible. I am human. Rare, yes. Impossible, no. The moon goddess has a twisted sense of humor," Soren murmured, moving toward the window. He looked out at the darkening sky. For a decade, Silas has been a brutal, unrelenting force. He believed himself devoid of a mate. And now, the universe has bound his soul to a human who despises him. He turned back to her, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. He is vulnerable now. A king controlled by a mating bond is a weak king, and a weak king. Soren let the sentence hang in the air, thick with treasonous implication. "Why are you telling me this?" Clarissa asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Because, Clarissa, you are in a unique position. You hold the leash to the most dangerous beast in the world," Soren said softly. "I only hope you are wise enough to know when to pull it, and who your true friends are." With a final, lingering look, Soren departed, leaving Clarissa alone in the gilded cage. She stared at the closed door, realizing with a cold certainty that the king might be the least of her worries. There were shadows moving in the castle, and she had just been shoved directly into their path. For 3 days, Clarissa saw no one but Elodie. The handmaiden was kind, bringing her exquisite gowns and brushing her hair, but she was entirely tight-lipped about the king. Clarissa felt like a ghost haunting a beautiful mausoleum. On the evening of the 4th day, General Corbin Blackstone appeared at her door. The massive warrior wore his dark armor, his face a map of pale scars. He looked at her with an expression of sheer disdain, yet he bowed his head slightly. "The king requests your presence in the solarium for dinner," Corbin grunted. "And if I refuse?" Clarissa challenged, folding her arms. Corbin stepped into the room, his sheer size eating up the space. "Listen to me, human," he growled, dropping his voice. "I don't care if you hold his soul. You disrespect him in public again, and I will forget my orders to protect you. He is holding this kingdom together by a thread, and you are a blade cutting at it. Do not test me." The unpredictable hostility from the general shocked her. Unlike Soren's slippery charm, Corbin's hatred was honest. It was born of loyalty to his king. Clarissa allowed herself to be escorted. The solarium was a breathtaking room made entirely of glass, overlooking a garden of night-blooming jasmine and silver roses. Silas stood by the glass, holding a crystal glass of amber liquid. He wore a simple black shirt that hugged his torso, looking less like a king and more like a solitary, dangerous man. Also in the room was Lady Lorelei. The beautiful lichen was draped over a velvet chaise, sipping wine and eyeing Clarissa with pure venom. "Silas, darling," Lorelei purred, intentionally omitting his title. "Is it wise to dine with the livestock?" "She smells of fear and dirt." Silas didn't look at Lorelei, his silver eyes fixed on Clarissa as she entered. The air in the room instantly thickened. Clarissa felt a strange, invisible pull in her chest, a tugging sensation that made her want to step closer to him. A terrifying instinct she fought with all her might. "Leave us, Lorelei," Silas commanded. His voice was soft, but it carried an absolute authority. Lorelei's face flushed with humiliation. "But, Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to." "I said, leave." The command laced with alpha authority made the glass walls vibrate. Lorelei scrambled to her feet, shooting Clarissa a look of murderous intent before fleeing the room. Corbin closed the door behind her, leaving them completely alone. Silas gestured to the table set for 2. "Sit." Clarissa remained standing. "I prefer to stand when facing my executioner." A ghost of a smile touched Silas's lips. It transformed his face, making him devastatingly handsome. He set his glass down and closed the distance between them. Clarissa's heart eradicated, but she refused to step back. He stopped a breath away from her. The scent of him, pine, ozone, and something deep and musky clouded her senses. Slowly, he reached out. Clarissa flinched, but his hand simply brushed a stray curl behind her ear. His touch was burning hot, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine. "I am not your executioner, Clarissa," he said softly, speaking her name for the first time. It sounded like a prayer on his lips. "I am your captive. Don't play games with me," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "You are the ruthless Alpha. You slaughter villages. You starve my people." Silas's eyes darkened with a heavy, ancient sorrow. "I do what I must to keep the northern wastes from invading. The tithe funds the army that keeps the monsters real monsters, Clarissa, creatures of shadow and rot from devouring your borders. I bear the hatred of my people so they can live to hate me." Clarissa stared at him, trying to reconcile the tyrant with the exhausted man standing before her. "Why did you kneel?" "Because," Silas said, stepping back, putting much-needed space between them. "For my entire life, I have been waiting for the one soul who would not bow to my monster. The mate bond demands absolute submission. My wolf recognized its master. You slapped a king, Clarissa, but you awakened a mate. I don't want you," she said, though her traitorous heart stuttered at his words. Silas looked away, his jaw tightening. "I know, and that is a punishment far worse than any blade you could strike me with. Eat your dinner, Clarissa. Tomorrow, the games begin, and you will need your strength." The next few weeks in the Obsidian Keep were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Clarissa was elevated from tribute to an unspoken queen. She was given unrestricted access to the castle libraries, the gardens, and the kitchens. Everywhere she went, guards bowed, and servants scrambled to accommodate her. Yet, the hostility of the court was palpable. Whispers followed her like a second shadow. The human witch. The king's weakness. She also began to notice the subtle fractures in Silas's rule. The king was frequently exhausted, spending days locked in the war room with Corbin Blackstone. Meanwhile, Soren Davenport seemed to be everywhere, whispering in the ears of the nobles, his golden smiles masking a venomous intent. One afternoon, Clarissa sought refuge in the ancient library. Elodie had accompanied her, sitting quietly in a corner mending a torn bodice. Clarissa was deep in a tome about lichen history. When she heard hushed voices from the adjacent aisle, she slipped quietly between the towering shelves, peering through a gap in the leather-bound books. It was Soren. He was speaking to Lady Lorelei. "The blood moon ball is in 2 days," Soren hissed, his smooth demeanor replaced by a feral snarl. "The mercenaries from the wastes are in position. We strike when the king is distracted." Lorelei looked pale, wringing her manicured hands. "Soren, this is treason. If Corbin finds out, he will tear us apart piece by piece." "Corbin is a brute. He lacks vision," Soren countered. "Silas has grown weak. He pines over a human girl instead of leading his pack. When he falls, I will take the alpha mantle, and you, Lorelei, will sit beside me, unless you prefer bowing to the dirt-born girl." Clarissa slapped a hand over her mouth, her blood turning to ice. Assassination. Soren was planning to murder Silas at the upcoming ball. She backed away, but her foot caught on a loose floorboard. It gave a loud, treacherous creak. The voices stopped instantly. "Someone is there," Soren barked. Clarissa turned to run, but strong hands clamped onto her shoulders from behind. She let out a muffled scream, struggling wildly, only to be spun around into the massive, unyielding chest of General Corbin Blackstone. Corbin clamped a hand over her mouth, his dark eyes intense. He pulled her flush against him, hiding them both in the deep shadows of an alcove just as Soren rounded the corner. Soren scanned the aisle, his eyes glowing with a faint, predatory light. He lingered for a moment, sniffing the air, before cursing under his breath and striding away. Corbin waited until the footsteps faded entirely before releasing her. Clarissa gasped for air, terrified. Was Corbin part of the plot? Was he going to kill her here to keep her quiet? "You heard them," Corbin grunted, his voice a low rumble. Yes. Soren wants to kill the king," Clarissa stammered, backing away. Corbin sighed, a heavy, weary sound, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I have suspected Davenport was a snake for months, but I had no proof. The nobles protect him. If I move against him without the king's direct order and undeniable evidence, it will spark a civil war. We have to tell Silas." Corbin looked at her, his scarred face softening by a fraction of an inch. "The king is compromised. Because of you. His wolf is frenzied, terrified of losing its mate before the bond is sealed. If he knows Soren threatens you, he will slaughter the entire court in a blind rage. It will be a massacre, and he will lose his throne." "Then what do we do?" Clarissa asked, realizing suddenly that she was plotting to save the man she had sworn to hate. "You attend the ball," Corbin said grimly. "Keep Silas close. I will position my most loyal guards at all the exits. When Soren makes his move, we catch him in the act. But you must be careful, human. If you fall, Silas will burn this world to ash." As Corbin turned to leave, Clarissa realized the terrifying truth. She was no longer a captive. She was the linchpin holding an entire kingdom together. And as she thought of Silas, his sad, mercury eyes, his gentle touch, she realized, with a sinking heart, that she didn't want him to die. The blood moon ball was a spectacle of terrifying beauty. The grand ballroom was bathed in the crimson light of the lunar eclipse, shining through the massive stained glass dome. The lichen elite danced to the haunting melodies of a string quartet, a swirling sea of silk, fangs, and predatory grace. Clarissa stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wore a gown of deep emerald, a color Silas had sent to her chambers, claiming it matched the life in her eyes. The silk clung to her curves, and diamonds rested against her collarbone. When she descended, the room parted for her. Not out of respect, but out of caution. At the bottom of the stairs waited Silas. He was breathtaking. In a tailored black suit with subtle silver embroidery, he looked every inch the lethal Alpha King. But when his eyes met hers, the coldness vanished, replaced by a heat so intense, it made her breath catch. He offered his hand. "You look beautiful, Clarissa." She placed her hand in his. The spark of the mate bond flared between them, a comforting warmth amidst the icy tension of the room. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Silas," he corrected softly, leading her onto the dance floor. "Tonight, just Silas." As he pulled her into a waltz, Clarissa's eyes darted around the room. She spotted Soren by the punch bowls, watching them with a dark, calculating smirk. Lorelei was nowhere to be seen. Corbin stood by the grand doors, his hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword, his eyes scanning the shadows. "You are tense," Silas murmured, his hand resting securely on her lower back, pulling her flush against his chest. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. "I am merely overwhelmed," she lied, forcing her gaze back to his. "It is a lot of wolves for one human." Silas's grip tightened possessively. "None of them will touch you. You are mine to protect." The music swelled, a chaotic, sweeping crescendo. Suddenly, the grand chandeliers hanging above them flickered and died. The room was plunged into the eerie, blood-red light of the moon. Panic erupted. Screams tore through the ballroom. "Silas!" Clarissa cried out. Before she could process what was happening, Silas grabbed her, spinning her behind him. 3 massive figures dropped from the balcony above rogue lichens from the waists, their eyes glowing yellow, their claws extended. Assassins. "Protect the queen!" Corbin's voice roared over the chaos, followed by the metallic shing of a broadsword being drawn. One of the rogues lunged at Silas. The king didn't even flinch. With a terrifying roar, his eyes flashed pure silver. He didn't fully shift into his wolf form, but his body expanded, claws erupting from his fingertips, his fangs elongating. He met the rogue midair, slamming him to the marble floor with bone-shattering force. Clarissa backed away, her pulse roaring in her ears. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto her arm, yanking her backward into the shadows of a heavy velvet curtain. It was Soren. He held a silver dagger, its blade coated in a dark, foul-smelling poison. "A pity, Clarissa. You would have made a beautiful pet." Soren raised the blade, aiming for her heart. Clarissa didn't scream. In a move born of pure borderland survival, she stomped her heel down as hard as she could onto Soren's foot, simultaneously driving her elbow backward into his ribs. Soren grunted, his grip loosening just enough. Clarissa spun out of his grasp, but the poison blade slashed across her upper arm. Fire, absolute blinding fire, erupted in her veins. She collapsed to her knees, gasping as the poison immediately began to shut down her nervous system. Soren recovered, raising the blade for a killing blow, but he never got the chance. A roar that shook the very foundations of the keep tore through the air. Silas had seen. The Alpha King threw off his attackers, his gaze locking onto Soren. The raw, unadulterated fury radiating from Silas was practically physical. A shockwave of alpha command that forced every lichen in the room to drop to their knees. Even Soren froze, his eyes widening in pure terror. Silas moved faster than the eye could track. He crossed the room in a blur, wrapping his massive hand around Soren's throat and lifting the traitor off the ground with a single arm. "You touched her," Silas snarled, his voice distorted, a demonic layering of human and wolf. With a sickening crunch, Silas threw Soren across the room, where the traitor crumpled against a pillar, unmoving. Silas ignored the rest of the battle. He dropped to his knees beside Clarissa, his terrifying, blood-soaked hands hovering over her trembling form. "Clarissa. Clarissa. Look at me. It burns," she gasped, her vision blurring at the edges. Silas tore his wrist to his own fangs, biting deep. He pressed his bleeding wrist to her lips. "Drink. Alpha blood heals. Drink, little bird." Clarissa swallowed the metallic, heavy blood. Almost instantly, the fire in her veins began to cool. The darkness receded. She opened her eyes to see the ruthless Alpha King, a man who commanded thousands, weeping. Tears tracked through the blood and dirt on his face as he pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. "I have you," he choked out, rocking her gently. "I have you." As Clarissa wrapped her arms around his broad, shaking shoulders, the last remnants of her hatred dissolved. She wasn't holding a monster. She was holding a man who loved her fiercely enough to break himself for her. The aftermath of the Blood Moon Ball changed the Obsidian Keep forever. Soren Davenport survived his injuries, only to be dragged to the dungeons by a furious Corbin Blackstone. Lady Lorelei, realizing her co-conspirator had failed, attempted to flee the castle under the cover of darkness. She was caught by Elodie, who, Clarissa learned with shock, was not merely a handmaiden but the king's master of whispers, a highly trained spy. In the days that followed, Silas barely left Clarissa's side. He sat by her bed as she recovered from the poison, reading to her, feeding her, his touch incredibly gentle for a man of such immense power. The court held its breath. The king had shown his vulnerability to the entire realm. He had prioritized a human over the battle. Many expected the lesser alphas to challenge him. A week later, Silas called for a full assembly of the court. Clarissa stood beside him on the dais. She wore no crown, only a simple white gown that contrasted starkly with the dark obsidian of the throne room. Her arm was wrapped in a neat bandage. The courtiers filed in, their heads bowed, terrified of the Alpha's wrath. Soren Davenport, chained in heavy iron, was brought to the center of the room. General Corbin stood behind him, looking thoroughly satisfied. Silas stepped forward. The room fell into a deathly silence. "For 10 years I have ruled you with fear," Silas began, his voice echoing powerfully off the stone walls. "I believed it was the only way to keep us strong, to keep the darkness at bay. But fear breeds resentment, and resentment breeds treason." He looked down at Soren. "Soren Davenport plotted to murder me and take the throne. He failed, not because my guards were faster, but because he underestimated the strength of the bond between an alpha and his mate. He underestimated her." Silas gestured to Clarissa. "From this day forward, the tithe is abolished," Silas declared. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Clarissa stared at him, her heart soaring. He was giving up the very taxes that sustained his lavish court to ease the suffering of her people. "We will forge alliances with the human lands, not subjugate them. We will stand together against the wastes, as equals." Silas turned, fully facing Clarissa. The entire court watched in stunned silence as King Silas Norwood, the ruthless alpha, stepped down from his throne, walked to Clarissa, and once again dropped to his knee. He took her hand, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles. "I knelt to you in submission of the mate bond," Silas said softly, though the acoustics of the room carried his words to every corner. "Today, I kneel to you to ask you to rule beside me, not as a captive, not as a tribute, but as Clarissa Kingswell, my equal, my heart, my queen. Will you have me, monster and all?" Clarissa looked down at the man who had terrified her, who had saved her, who was now laying his entire kingdom at her feet. She saw the vulnerability in his silver eyes, the desperate hope. She smiled, a brilliant, radiant expression that seemed to light up the dark corners of the keep. She tugged gently on his hands, urging him to stand. When he rose, towering over her, she reached up and cupped his scarred, handsome face. "You are no monster, Silas, and I will gladly be your queen." She pulled him down, pressing her lips to his in front of the entire court. The kiss was a sealing of the bond, a rush of warmth, power, and overwhelming love that swept through the room. There were no gasps of horror this time. As the king and his human queen embraced, General Corbin Blackstone drew his sword, holding it high in salute. One by one, the lichen nobility followed suit, bowing their heads, not out of fear, but in genuine reverence for the king who had learned to love, and the human woman who had taught him how. Love does not always arrive softly, wrapped in velvet and bathed in sunlight. Sometimes, it crashes into our lives like a storm, tearing down the walls we built to survive. Clarissa and Silas's journey reminds us that true authority is never born from cruelty or fear. Real strength lies in the courage to be vulnerable, the bravery to stand up against injustice, and the profound power of a love that defies all boundaries. The ruthless alpha learned that the greatest victory is not conquering a kingdom, but surrendering your heart to the one who makes you whole. We all have the power to break curses not with magic, but with defiance, empathy, and love. Did Clarissa and Silas's intense journey steal your heart? If you loved this tale of enemies turned fated mates, please like, share, and subscribe for more epic, atmospheric romance stories that will leave you breathless.